This is Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about my favorite mechanism in the game from Pencil First Games called Herbaceous. I actually played the pocket version of this game over the weekend a few times with my family, and this is the Japanese version that I have here. But I left the pocket version with my family because it was so nice, and I knew that I had this copy back at home. In Herbaceous, you are basically just potting plants. It's set collection. So you have these four different pots, and over the course of the game, you are going to, at certain times, decide that you are ready to pot one of these plants and and put a bunch of cards in one of these pots. When you do that, you're done working with that pot. So, for example, this pot wants you to have any three cards. Any three cards, you get some bonus points for it as well. This one wants different pairs of herbs. This one wants all identical herbs, and this one wants different herbs. And you're using these herb cards that you're gaining over the course of the game. You're on every turn, you are drawing a card and either keeping it or putting that card in the middle of the table, and then you are gaining another card based on where you put that other card. So if I draw a card and I gain it, then I also then have to draw a card and put it in the middle of the table. So constantly you are growing your own private garden, but you are also developing a public garden. And that is where my favorite mechanism comes in, because whenever you decide to pot in this game, whenever you say, okay, I'm ready to pot to plant herbs in this pot, you take any number of cards from your private garden and the public garden that match the requirement of that pot, and you put them in that pot, and then you're done with that pot. The key here being that you are gaining those herbs from the private and the public garden. That is my favorite mechanism. I love that you have access to your own garden and the public spread that all players are contributing to over the course of the game. The reason I really like this and why it shines in this game is that it creates a big reason, a major reason to pay attention to other players. What other players have in their private gardens, what other players have already potted, and what other players are going for. It adds a lot of tension when it's your turn and you're deciding, is this the turn where I want to pot my plant that wants identical flowers based on what I see from other players, based on what I have in my private garden, and based on what in that moment is available in the public garden. Because if I don't do it, if I wait, then that means that the next player or any of the other players as we go around the table might use their turn or part of their turn to grab some of those public herbs and put them in their pot. So that it adds a really nice tension to the game while giving every player access to a lot more herbs than they would normally have in only their private garden. And part of what I'm trying to talk about in these game design videos is what problem does this solve? And I've kind of already mentioned that a little bit in terms of it addresses some player interaction, so it adds player interaction to a game that might otherwise be only about what you're doing privately in your own private garden. But it also gives you access to a lot more cards than you would otherwise have. Design and component implications that go into this are that, critically, in my opinion, the cards don't have text on them. They are just representative of a certain herb. They do have a name at the top, but in the pocket version, it doesn't even have the name because it's not needed. You don't need the name on these herbs. And I think that's pretty important because if you were constantly reading these cards, like every time you drew a card, you had to read what was on that card, or all those cards accumulate in the middle of the table and you have to read what's on them from different angles, that can add complications to the game. I always try to look out for that in game design. I don't always achieve it. Some of my games do have cards with text that you need to see from across the table, but I'm always trying to think about that. If you have cards in a public space, especially an accumulating number of cards, not asking players to have to read them from across the table. And at worst, that if you do that, or at best, really, that you have icons on them that explain what the cards do. So from across the table, you can more easily see the icon rather than having to read a paragraph of text. Also, how do I see this mechanism being used elsewhere? I'm trying to think of other games that let you essentially, solve missions or fill orders or pot plants in this case, using not just your private stuff but also the public stuff as well. And I couldn't think of any offhand. I'm sure they exist, but I really like that mechanism. I like the idea that if you do have missions to go on or orders to fulfill, that you don't just have access to your own materials, that you do have access to some common pool that is easily accumulating over the course of the game, easily and organically accumulating, because it adds that nice player tension and because it gives you more access to things that you wouldn't otherwise have in your personal supply. So yeah, that is my favorite mechanism in Herbaceous. This is the first video that I filmed where I've tried to focus on a few different design elements here. Let me know if that worked out for you, or if you'd want me to tweak this for me a little bit as I move forward with these game design videos. Thanks.